So how would you fancy an intimate evening with myself and Niall, where we're going to be chatting all about talking with criminals and you're going to ask us some questions? We'll be performing our brand new show, Look Who's Talking, live in Kilkenny this weekend on Saturday the 17th of May at the Pembroke Hotel at 8 o'clock. Very limited tickets are available on www.kilkennylawfestival.com.
Hey Rob, send this to everyone, will you? I love you all so much, so much. I love you. I'm okay. I'm safe. Going to school, fucking learning Spanish, going to the gym, swimming, playing football. A1. I'm fucking A1. I'm in a low security unit. There's no violence here, nothing like that. It's not allowed, or else you get fucked out. All the prisoners are on the sus. They don't let anyone at the bars because it fucks them all up. So it's A1. So I worry about it like that. Obviously, now I didn't do it because I found the girl dead. I love you all very much, and just keep this video if you ever want to watch it. I love you, right? All my heart. See you all soon.
So that's the voice of Keith Byrne speaking from his prison cell when he was on remand for the murder of Kirsty Ward. And he says, and it's quite chilling the way he says it, he just calls her that girl. And I remember hearing it at the time and thinking, that's a very strange way to describe your girlfriend. But obviously that video was put out, I think, to family and friends as a kind of I suppose, to sort of pretend, claim to be innocent. But it hasn't. His claims, and the claims certainly were very upsetting to the family, weren't accepted by a court in Spain.
No, so Keith Byrne was found guilty of the murder of Kirsty Ward, his bed then partner, in July 2023. They were on a holiday in Salou, which is very close to Barcelona, and she was found dead in their 4-star hotel that they were staying in. So he went on trial, and I think the jury took 3 days to come back with the guilty verdict, and he had protested his innocence. He was basically trying to say that he found Kirsty dead and that she committed suicide, and the prosecution who led the case was very clear how this didn't make sense, basically based on the evidence, but that it was also an attempt by him to slur Kirsty. Her mother gave evidence and said she would never in a million years contemplate suicide. She had a child from a previous partner. He was 14 at the time of her death. They were best friends, the mother said. So, this was all very clearly denied by the prosecution. And, as you said there about the video about how he described her, he also gave his own testimony. So he took to the stand during his trial, and he basically tried to really cast her, he said really bad things about Kirsty. He basically tried to describe her as a monster, said she had 4 personalities in one day. So I suppose it just speaks to the character of the person.
Yeah, so if we go back to it, Kirsty Ward was a mother of one from the south side of Dublin.
Dundrum, yep.
From Dundrum. And she had been in a relationship, I think it's described as an on-off relationship with Keith Byrne.
Yeah, it was about 8 months altogether.
And, by all accounts, it was, I think her own mother or people who knew her described it as kind of a volatile relationship. What do we know about Keith Byrne? He had a interesting background, let's put it that way.
Yeah, he did. So Keith Byrne, when he was arrested originally, so this was obviously, we were able to write a bit about him at the time before he was charged because it was a different jurisdiction. So he was obviously arrested in Spain where the offence took place, and it took 2 years for this to come, nearly 2 years for this to come to trial. So at the time, we reported how he was from Duluth, or was living in Duluth in County Meath, but I think he was originally from Kilbarrack in North Dublin. And he wasn't necessarily known to police as we reported at the time, but he did have a few different interactions with criminals, and he also was said to have gone AWOL from the British Army in 2017, so he was wanted by them. And then there was also basically former partners came forward at the time that he was being investigated for Kirsty's murder, and one in particular gave evidence or gave a statement to the Guardian, which she said that during their relationship, so she was with him for several years, and that this would have been a few years previous to him killing Kirsty, but this woman claimed to Gardaí that he tried to strangle her, and that, you know, she was lucky that people came in on them at the time. She was able to get away from him, and eventually she ended the relationship. And she basically had said, this could have been me if it wasn't for the support of my friends and family, and, you know, someone coming in and stopping him. So, you know, he obviously, this was there, and then he was before the courts in Spain. So it's kind of been moving along since then, but now he is convicted of the murder, and I guess that kind of maybe sheds a bit of light maybe about,
Yeah, I mean,
you know, his...
Yeah, like he obviously, like he hadn't got major criminal convictions. I mean, there was one particularly interesting case, I think it was in 2013, where he was prosecuted for trying to siphon diesel from a car, and that in itself is about as low level as you can get. And he just got the Probation Act, but he was with a guy obviously called Caelan Smith, who would go on to become very notorious for the role he played in the, you know, in various criminal enterprises, including an attempt on the life of James Mago Gately as part of the Hutchkin feud.
Yeah.
So Keith Byrne was obviously knocking around with people like that. He at some point seemed to have gone off and joined the British Army, and then gone AWOL, and I presume that had come to an end.
Yeah.
Obviously, when Kirsty Ward was found dead, she had been strangled, and the core of this case was, you know, how that had come about, basically.
Yeah.
What did we hear specifically about that? Because Keith Byrne was obviously in that video, he's very, very confidently proclaiming he's going to be found innocent.
Yeah.
But we heard very specific information about why that wasn't accepted by the jury.
Yeah, like the prosecution mounted a very strong case, and they said, so what happened was, this was described in court as a make or break holiday. So they'd been gone out for about 8 months, but there was trouble there. And Kirsty's mother gave evidence and said that, you know, she hadn't been told a lot. I suppose you don't always tell your mother these things. She didn't know a lot about the ins and outs, but that she did have a bad feeling when Kirsty was going on this holiday, and kind of said that she didn't feel good about it. She didn't trust Keith Byrne. So then when they were on this holiday, according to the prosecution case, they had a row, and Kirsty said, this is it, it's over. Keith Byrne left the room and then came back to the room, and the case put forward and accepted by the jury was that there was a row, another row, and he strangled her with the cord of a hair straightener. So Keith Byrne then later tried to claim, and as you said, he coldly said in that video, I found that girl dead. He tried to claim that he came back and that Kirsty, there was a cord attached to the door and she had taken her own life, which didn't make sense according to the prosecution. And they said it can clearly, based on Kirsty's injuries and the way the scene was, you know, she had been strangled from behind with this cord. And, you know, she obviously died from asphyxiation. So that was obviously the case. And, you know, it was also heard how Kirsty, you know, she was basically, because there was alcohol taken and there was drugs taken, she wasn't able to defend herself the way that maybe you could be in different circumstances, and that Keith Byrne used this to his advantage, basically. Yeah,
and though it was also said that you know, he was obviously had been using or drinking very heavily as well.
The same. And, you know, obviously he was stronger than her, and, you know, he used, basically it was set up, it was, you know, he set this scene up to try and make it look like a suicide, and he used a superior strength and maybe the fact that she was, you know, the two of them were intoxicated against her, essentially.
So the family, Kirsty Ward's family, have put out a statement in the aftermath, thanking Spanish prosecutors, I think, for they described it as for their empathy and understanding, and they've connected this case, which is obviously is connected with a domestic violence, a crime of that nature. They've had to obviously deal with the judicial authorities in a totally other country. I mean, it must be a very difficult circumstances. Yeah. They obviously have also brought what's called a private prosecution alongside the criminal prosecution.
Yeah, so there was actually a GoFundMe appeal set up there a few weeks, well, maybe in the last couple of months anyway, by friends of Kirsty's family. And, we did a story and it was confirmed to us that this was to basically aid this case. So they were advised by the prosecution over there, it's quite common there, so that this civil action runs at the same time as the trial. And essentially that will probably be decided on, because even though Keith Byrne was found guilty of the murder, the judge is going to take about a month to decide on his sentence. They're looking for between 20 and 30 years for the murder of Kirsty Ward. So I assume when the judge comes back, he'll also decide on this civil action. And what was asked for in the case was, I think it was 100,000 for Kirsty Ward's mother. She's now, as far as we're aware, helping to raise her son, and then also 150,000 for Kirsty's son, who was robbed from him, as she was robbed from him. So this GoFundMe basically spoke about that and spoke about how they needed support.
So it's an interesting thing, the private prosecution. Obviously Ireland has a common law system, really coming from the UK courts, and that those courts will be what people are used to here, and they're similar to the US courts. But in Spain, you can bring a private prosecution, and that private prosecution is allowed to interact with the criminal prosecution. So the criminal prosecution is obviously brought by a judge, and it's independent in that way. But in a private prosecution is also allowed question people in a court. They're also allowed seek a certain sentences. They're also allowed to be there for the interviews. So it's a very, very different system there.
Yeah.
Now it does, obviously the civil case is an aspect of it, but they're also allowed sort of simultaneously prosecute on behalf of the family. It's a very different situation than we have here, but that is what the family have brought there.
Yeah. And it must be daunting as well if you're faced with this. You're obviously dealing, as you said, it's a different country, different language, different justice system. So, this is part of the reason why the GoFundMe was set up. And they raised nearly all of their target. It's now been closed because obviously the case is over, but they raised over 30,000 from people who wanted to help. It is I can imagine that it's very daunting having to do this, but they were encouraged to do this. And I suppose we'll see in the coming weeks what the judge decides in that regard. But I guess it's something that hopefully will help the family and help, for the support of Kirsty's son going forward as well. Yeah,
it's a totally different thing where they're, by bringing in a private prosecution, you're effectively, allowed to have a role in that actual prosecution in the court. So it's you get to question people and all of those sort of issues. Now, as you said, we're awaiting sentence. In Spain, again, the sentencing is different. There's not automatic life tariff like we have here. And the private family prosecutors also sought I think it's three decades in prison, 30 years.
Yeah, they were seeking 30 years, and then Jared Cousins has been reporting on this from Spain, and he reported this week that sources close to the case told him that they would be happy we're closer to 20 now. I think intoxication was maybe going to be used as a mitigating factor towards Keith Byrne, that he was obviously under the influence of certain intoxicants, but that was originally what they were looking for, was 30 years. So it will be hopefully in between that period anyway, and we're due to find out, I think, in June.
Yeah, so Keith Byrne, obviously that video, it's strange when people are murder suspects, when they start interacting publicly like that about cases.
Yeah.
It's not common. It often comes with, and we don't know Keith Byrne, but it also comes with that kind of narcissistic traits of believing that you can influence people's opinions through your own particular charm.
It's extremely self-serving from my original listen of it, because it was he was trying to, I'm sure he did have people concerned about him, and maybe he does have loved ones who believed him, but it was all like, don't you worry, I'm okay, this is a low security unit, there's no violence, he'd get thrown out if there's violence. And it was just very much like him concerned about himself, and the fact that everybody else would be concerned about himself. And as you said, the way he referred to Kirsty as well, it didn't seem like somebody who had lost their partner by suicide and was in this horrific situation. He was very calm.
So that kind of attitude also was displayed in court, I suppose, because although we weren't there and the proceedings were conducted in Spanish, and I think Byrne spoke in Spanish in the case, he seems to have represented himself, at least in part, and any of the kind of the self-awareness, I suppose, when you're talking about a mother, a young mother who's died and left a child, he didn't display that in the court either. He seems to have, I think, Gerard Cousins, the reporter who was there, described it as kind of a ranting performance.
Yeah, and he tried to portray her as it was described in his copy as a monster, and said that she had 4 personalities in one day. She was constantly changing her mood, and that he didn't kill anybody. And this is obviously, the jury didn't accept he was found guilty of murder, but the prosecution in the closing speeches made it very clear that this is basically the self-serving lies of somebody who's trying to get away with a crime. And also it was kind of the prosecution claimed that Byrne displayed it, if you're not mine, you're not anybody's attitude, and that's why he killed her, because he couldn't accept the end of the relationship. And also this suicide theory that Byrne tried to put forward was completely thrown out, because it was said, if you look at all of the evidence around it, like, she didn't leave a suicide note. She had a son who was described as extremely close to, she was very close to her family. She didn't leave any kind of note. She had a flight home booked. So, this was all very, strong evidence that was used to sort of cast aspersions, or not even cast aspersions, cast cold water on what Byrne was trying to say. But by all accounts, he did try and put on a show in the stand.
Yeah, I mean, he describes himself as respectful and a respectful and intelligent father of 3 who would never commit an act of domestic violence and had never been accused of hurting a woman in Ireland. He said, for the last 2 years, people have called me a killer and I've been locked up in a shitty prison for a crime I didn't commit. I'm here today as a witness and also as a victim. This wasn't a murder, it was a suicide. My last words to Kirsty before she was taken away by police after giving her a kiss were, I love you forever with all my heart and soul. None of this is your fault. Go and rest in peace. However, that was, I suppose, flatly contradicted by a domestic violence expert who was brought in. Says that Byrne adapted his version of events of what happened in that time frame nearly 2 years on, in accordance with the evidence he's learned there is against him. He's saying Kirsty had tied a cable around her neck and attached it to the doorknob, but in the state she was in, it would have been impossible for her to do that, and there's nothing showing that there was a knot in the cable. What occurred here is a violent and painful death, a strangulation from behind when someone is pulling from the front to the back. This was not a suicide.
No. And, in the comments following the verdict as well, the prosecutor did say, that as a lawyer, they were very satisfied, because basically it seemed like a really unanimous decision, and said that the jury basically it came to the conclusion that Kirsty didn't have suicide thoughts, and, that it kind of, they use the word tranquilize, but I think they mean that, it obviously gave peace to Kirsty's family, because he tried to stain her name with the talk of mental health issues, and that just wasn't held up in court, basically.
And it hasn't succeeded.
No.
And we'll come back to this case when we hear the sentencing and what the court says at that point.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So thanks, Eimear.
Thanks, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.